Well, you sent us some interesting stuff when we asked you to give us subjects to discuss in these sessions, but inevitably they are always the sticky ones. Nothing easy.
I want interesting ones.
Had a great one from Anthony W. Could you possibly tell me how and where to find the relevant information about the LP length for an installation? The rest is fine, but this information might be difficult. That's an understatement, Anthony. So we're not going to mess around with the index thing and technique here. We're going straight into the subject. 443 is where we're on to, protection against transient overvoltages of atmospheric origin or due to switching. And if we look in there, we see that there has been a change from the 17th.
Yeah, there used to be the AQ criteria. Anything less than 25 thunderstorm days resulted in you not needing it, which there was nothing in the UK, so most people totally ignored it.
Totally ignored it. And clearly there was a desire in these regs, we can see all over the place, that the SPDs are quite desirable. So the idea was that there would be a risk assessment method called the Calculated Risk Assessment, or CRL. An equation is given to us, which is FENV, environment, and that's over LP times NG. So we just need to look at that briefly because Anthony's asking about one of those, which is LP.
Dave, I just want to point out at the top here that there are 4 scenarios where you do need SPDs for protection against transient overvoltages. For all other cases, you would probably just install SPDs, or you've got the option of doing this calculated risk assessment, which is what we're talking about, the formula. But domestic dwellings are exempt from this, and that's because the total value of the goods and value of the equipment and the installation is probably not worth it. But I think we're going to see some movement on that. So if your installation isn't a dwelling or doesn't match one of these scenarios, then the calculated risk level is probably the position you want to take.
This would only be where there wasn't a clear requirement and you wanted to know if there was likely to be a risk. So if we turn the page to page 103 and look at table 443.1, the calculation of FM, that's quite straightforward. There's 2 options on that one for that constant in the equation. And we did actually look up how these things are defined because they're called rural and suburban environments and urban environments. And there is a British standard 62305-2 which gives us definitions. An urban environment, an area with a high density of buildings or densely populated communities with tall buildings, and it says note to entry a town centre. Pretty straightforward, that one. We've guessed that one. Suburban, again, we'd most likely know it. Area with a medium density of buildings, note to entry town outskirts. So where the houses are thinning out, gardens are getting bigger gap between the buildings. And then finally, the rural environment would be an area of low density buildings where you may have to drive from house to house, that sort of place. So we've got these 2, rural and suburban are clumped together with an FM of 85, and urban environments are 850 because presumably the risk is lower in those areas.
Basically, we're looking for a outcome of, if you've got a value greater than 1,000, it's not required, and if you've got a value less than 1,000, it is required. So this is what we're going to come back to the graph in a minute. Okay.
Yes, we've been plotting some of these things.
Yeah, we had an interesting morning.
So that is the FM's taken care of. The NG, flashings per kilometre per year, there's a map, 44.2, flash density map of the UK, and it gives various NG values. There are 7 different bands of value, and we can see that in the north and Scotland there's very low risk, whereas if you come down to the east of England, by and large, Peterborough and Ipswich are, for some reason, lightning hotspots. I don't know what you're doing in those places, but anyway. So that figure's given as well. Pretty straightforward. So we've got most of our equation complete, but the one that
this is what Anthony's
asking
about.
is LP, which is a bit more confusing. So let's break that one down then.
Okay, well, let's have a look here. LP is made up of 4 constituent parts, which is the length of the low voltage cable, which could be underground, overhead, and we've also got high voltage underground and overhead. Okay. So we need to come up with the risk assessment length, LP, which is made up of those constituent parts. And this formula here nicely sets it out. Okay. Yeah,
so some of them have to be multiplied, 2, LPAL.
So LPAL. Now, the way that I work this out is they're all beginning with P. I'm going to say power, that's in my little head, that's how I work it out. A is air, as in above ground. Okay. And C is concealed, so it's buried underground. Okay. And the letter on the end, L is low voltage, H high voltage, and H is high.
And we've got a graphic here which is not typical at all, but shows each of them in their various situations. So the bit that's causing, I think, some confusion is that the LP figure is made up of this either calculation or straight figures from those various lengths. But what the regs tell us is that the total length that can be inserted into that LP equation must not be more than 1 kilometre in total. So, or by the distance from the first overvoltage protective device installed in the power network, which I don't think we're not going to know. So let's take a scenario, Gary. We roll up for a job, we've got to make an assessment, and we don't know anything. We don't know where the cables are, where they're coming from, where the power station is. Well, what do we do there?
Well, if the distribution network lengths are totally or partially unknown, which is in the next paragraph down, then LPAL shall be taken as equal to the remaining distance to reach that of 1 kilometre. Okay.
So there we could say then that LPAL will default to 1 kilometre because we don't know anything. So in that equation, it would be LP equals 2 LPAL. So LPAL would be 2. Or LP rather would be 2.
2, yes. Yeah, we could do. So we show that.
So let's just model that. So this is an extreme example where you don't know anything and you're having to substitute the figure in the regs. We're getting an LP value of 2, and that is what would happen to the risk assessment outcome. So where we've got the green line, this is the rural and suburban. Remember the higher risk places with an FM of 85.
For any of the NGs then, in this example, from the south coast to the north of Scotland, you're going to need SPDs in rural installations, except dwellings of course, because they're exempt. So I can see everyone in Scotland being up in arms about this, but let's just look at this. This is the worst case scenario. We don't know how long the cables are, what the exposure is, so we've limited it to 1 kilometre. But in reality, what you could do then is just install SPDs because of their cost, relatively cheap, and you're going to get that protection. Or if you wanted to get this green line above the 1,000 threshold, we've got to get LP down, okay? So what you'd need to do is do your homework and find out those values. But just remember, this is based on the worst case scenario.
What we've done is we've plotted the NGs and we've plotted more than the ones listed in the regs. There's 7 actually defined in the regs, but to make the band smoother, we've plotted a few more in between. Makes no difference really because the main key points are still being hit. But if you look at the urban version with the 850F end, it changes a little bit because we now have a part that is under the 1,000, but when we get to 850, 0.5 rather, NG, we find that they're all below the 1,000, but above that, 0.4 and less.
I think we just better take a step back. LPAL being low voltage overhead cables.
Yes.
So a greater risk of lightning strikes.
Yes.
Okay, so the longer it is, the more chances could be.
There's a complete logic to all this, but it's just a bit confusing how it's described for us in the regs. Let's just take an example, Gary, where we do know something and how we deal with making up the difference to this 1 kilometre.
So it goes to some worked examples.
Well, there are some worked examples in the book, aren't there? So if we turn to
page 105,
page
106.
Yeah, 105 gives us a worked example with different amounts. So LPAL in this is 0.4. Okay.
So that's 400 metres of low voltage cable that's overhead. Yeah, okay.
So that goes into the equation.
And as I stated earlier, then we don't know what the rest is. We have to make up the rest to a kilometre, so that's 0.6.
It is, but in fact, in this worked value, just to underline that point, it gives us 0.6.
Lovely.
So we now have that. So if we go back to the equation, we can see that LP would equal 2 times 0.6 plus 0.4, which is giving us a total of, in this worked value, 1.04. So this makes the point, and we just need to underline it. The LP figure can be more than 1 kilometre. So if we take a look at that and see what it does to the change, very little change in the rural environment. Right up there. A little bit. It gets close in the rural environment, but in the urban environment, the breakpoint has moved quite a lot further along, and we'd have to go to an area which has got an NG of 0.9 or just above, or just below rather, to get over that 1,000 point. So if you don't know the distance for LPAL, there is a default figure you can use in the CRL. If you do know the figure, as long as the total that you enter into the LP equation does not exceed 1,000 metres, 1 kilometre, then it should bring you a figure which is accurate for the risk assessment. I'd like to risk the fact that we've possibly answered that.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Hopefully lightning doesn't strike twice.
Let us know if it does. We hope you found that useful. If there's a subject you'd like us to talk through or a question you'd like us to examine, then why not send it to us? Dave Austin at learninglounge.com will get to me, or you can put the comment in the box below.
And don't forget, you can find more questions on our website, learninglounge.com/18. And you can get even more questions if you subscribe to one of our courses.